Thank you for joining this webinar hosted by Viva. Great to have you here. By the looks of it, we've got really good numbers, so that's great. My name is Daniel Capurro. I'm front bench editor at the Telegraph. I write a morning politics newsletter. Do sign up if you haven't already. But we're not here to talk about Westminster politics in general. We're here to talk about factory farming. So there's been a lot of discussion in recent years. I'm sure you will have seen about protecting the UK's animal welfare standards and about importing low standard foods and about protecting British farmers. But it's perhaps underappreciated that in this country, around 1 billion animals a year, land animals, are reared for consumption in intensive factory farms. So it's not just outside of this country that we need to look at when it comes to animal welfare. The practices of these intense factory farms are well known, well documented, especially thanks to the work of Viva and similar groups and campaigners. I'm sure you've heard a lot about them, but we'll discuss them more this afternoon with our fantastic panel and hear about them. It's particularly topical at the moment. We're on Zoom for good reason. We've all been stuck at home trying to avoid a pretty nasty disease that has come most likely from our mistreatment of animals. And it's not the first time. You know, before COVID-19, we were worrying about swine flu and avian flu, and both of those have been documented in intensive farms. And it is the case, you know, scientists have warned that the intensification of agriculture is one of the key factors in the increasing prevalence of zoonotic diseases. In a typical year pre-COVID pandemic, there were over 200 zoonotic diseases in circulation, and they caused about 2.5 billion cases of illness and 2.7 million deaths each year. So it's no small issue. And of course, there are other risks as well. Scientists have been warning for a long time about the rise of antimicrobial resistance. And a big element of that is the use and abuse of antibiotics in farming, given to all kinds of livestock, sort of indiscriminately. And at the same time, these kind of issues are, I hope, becoming more and more well known around the world, and particularly in the United Kingdom. Earlier this month, a coalition of MPs urged the government to outlaw factory farming in the UK and to bring an end to the cruel practices that are involved. And polling, including a recent poll commissioned by Viva, shows substantial support among the British public for ending these practices. So that's why we're all here together with this fantastic panel. We've got political voices, experts, seasoned campaigners, who will talk us through whether now is the moment to ban factory farming in the UK. I'll introduce the panel in just a moment, but just a couple of notes before we get started. There will be a brief Q&A at the end, so do please submit those in the Q&A facility, which hopefully I'll be able to find myself in a moment, and I will put some of your questions to the panel. And if you are going to post about this event on social media, which I hope you will do, please do use the hashtag #EndFactoryFarming. Thank you. So on to our esteemed guests. With us today are Juliette Gallatli, the founder and director of Viva. She's also a former director of the Vegetarian Society and an author and campaigner. Her books include The Live Wire Guide to Going, Being and Staying Veggie, The Silent Arc, a chilling expose of meat, the global killer, and Born to be Wild, The Live Wire Guide to Saving Animals. Juliette was the winner of the Linda McCartney Award for Animal Welfare, sponsored by the Daily Mirror's Pride of Britain Awards, and the PEA Award in 2020. She's also produced an Amazon Prime documentary called Hogwood, which is on the global animal welfare impacts of factory farming. Also with us is Sir Roger Gale. He's the MP for North Thanet, has been since 1983. He's been a member of the Speaker's Panel of Chairmen since 1997. He was Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party under the leadership of Iain Duncan Smith from 2001 to 2003. And he's also a founding member and current president of Conservative Animal Welfare. He was knighted in 2012 for public and political services. Also with us, hopefully, possibly not joined yet, but hopefully will be with us soon, is Dr. Lisa Cameron. She is a Scottish National Party MP and a consultant clinical psychologist. She's been a member of Parliament since winning her seat in the 2015 general election. She was born in Glasgow and grew up in East Kilbride. and obtained her BSc in psychology from the University of Strathclyde, and an MSc in psychology and health from the University of Stirling, and a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Glasgow. Also with us, Kerri Waters. She's a campaigner at Viva and an animal rights and environmental campaigner. She was the political coordinator and spokesperson for Animal Rebellion, and is currently preparing to start a PhD researching how to transition farmers away from animal farming, and has a role at Viva promoting a plant-based food system. Before becoming a full-time activist, Kerri worked at DEFRA, paying farm subsidies to farmers. We've also got Rebecca Knowles. She is the founding director of Farmers for Stock-Free Farming, a Scottish-based grassroots group established to inspire and support farmers in the transition to animal-free agriculture. Rebecca also founded Vegan Outreach Scotland, a movement with the goal to end mass suffering of animals as a result of meat and dairy consumption. And last but not least, we have Iain Tolhurst. He's the owner and the main driving force at Tolhurst Organic, the first farm in the world to attain the stock-free organic symbol in 2004. Iain founded the farm more than 30 years ago and grows only plant crops according to stock-free principles, which means he uses neither manure nor artificial fertilizer. Tolhurst Organic is one of the longest running organic farms in the country, with its original organic certification from the Soil Association beginning in 1976. So without further ado, we'll get on to the discussion. So first up, I want to go to each of the panelists for 2 minutes to ask, should the UK become one of the first countries in the world to outlaw intensive factory farming methods? And we'll go to Juliette to begin.
Hello, everybody. Yes, factory farming must be outlawed. We need the government to take action to stop animal cruelty, to save our planet, and of course to protect us from future pandemics, antibiotic resistance, further chronic disease, and from food insecurity. I'd argue any civilized nation cannot allow factory farming to continue. I'd also argue that a purpose of government is to provide security for its people, so factory farming must go, and quickly. I've got 3 decades of experience of investigating factory farming, usually the biggest names and usually approved by Red Tractor. I'll give you some examples of what I've seen, because we should be strong enough to admit that factory farming should be banned just because it's an utterly disgraceful way to treat our fellow living beings, let alone all these other major issues. At a Bernard Matthews unit, there were gigantic industrial sheds containing thousands of birds in each. What many people don't realise is that turkeys are highly communicative, social, intelligent animals. And by the way, they love a good shoulder massage. Yet these substantially sized birds were packed so tightly together that I literally couldn't even walk through them to film. I witnessed dead, dying birds, birds with severe injuries, and at the same time, Bernard Matthews were advertising on television telling us how incredible the conditions were for these animals. These forest-dwelling animals are being bred to be so obese that they cannot even mate naturally. The males are masturbated and the females given artificial insemination. Just last Christmas, we filmed in 3 turkey farms supplying 4 UK supermarkets. So I'm talking about the big guys here. In one Red Tractor approved unit, we filmed turkeys being kicked more than 200 times. And these are not aberrant cases, sadly. I filmed yellow fluffy broiler chicks kept in their tens of thousands on the floors of warehouses. Because they're bred to grow so fast, their skeletons can't support them. And again, I filmed them collapsing in pain, supplying the giants like Avara who go to most supermarkets. I filmed in many pig units, and in fact, our documentary just mentioned in the intro, which is called Hogwood on Amazon Prime, perfectly illustrates what we're discussing today. In a mega pig unit, which supplied Tesco, who dug their heels in supporting this unit, no matter how much cruelty we showed, until in the end, we left hidden cameras showing the humans actually hitting the animals, and then they withdrew from supporting Hogwood. Mothers lay in concrete, vast warehouses, and there's no way for these mothers to nuzzle their youngs because they're incarcerated in crates not much bigger than themselves. And you'd think with a pandemic that farms would have upped their biosecurity, but no, in another mega pig farm that I filmed last year, feral cats were actually eating the very young piglets alive. Viva's filmed on 15 dairy units, all supplying Cadbury, another universally recognised name. All those units zero grazed the animals. We filmed a male calf being shot in the head, which happens to tens of thousands because they're unwanted byproducts of the dairy industry. So 4/5 of all meat and dairy in the UK comes from factory farms. And of those 1 billion animals killed each year in the UK, they all need feeding, of course. And it's a monstrously wasteful food system, because for every 100 calories we feed to those animals, we receive only 12 calories back by consuming their flesh and milk. So what does this mean? It means that almost half of all UK land is currently tied in to growing feed or to grazing animals, providing very little nutrition in comparison to the amount of resource put into the system. So evidently the answer is not to take intensive farming outdoors. The answer is, of course, to go vegan and along that path towards it. If we were all to switch to vegan, 15 million hectares of land in Britain could be used, which is now used for animal agriculture, would be freed to grow a diverse range of crops for people to be fed directly, and for those areas to be returned to nature, creating wildlife havens and removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. On plant-based, the UK could feed 200 million people. Now just take that in for a minute. It means we could be completely self-sufficient on a plant-based diet. And currently our obsession with meat and dairy, we are nowhere near self-sufficient, and all those issues with food insecurity that throws up. The UK banning factory farming would be an enormous step to ending so many global emergencies, from wildlife and climate crises to human disease to animal cruelty. Britain could lead the way, supporting farmers to transition to stock-free farming, supporting alternative protein industries, taxing meat, fish and dairy, and urging consumers to choose vegan. So the government could be actively involved in securing the future for all of us. We can choose to end factory farming before it ends us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Juliet. So we'll now come to Sir Roger. So the same question, should the UK become one of the first countries to ban intensive factory farming? Oh, Sir Roger, I think you need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Gotcha. The short answer to that question is yes. The long answer is yes, please. But I suspect that you want a little more than that. Juliet and I think most, if not all, of the other members of the panel are either vegetarian or vegan. I'm not. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that animals should not be treated properly. The fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, that at the moment, the majority of the population of the United Kingdom is carnivorous or pescators. And that means that we have to look to the reality of the situation. If we're going to win this battle politically, and I believe that we can, and I believe that now is the right moment to start to fight that battle seriously, then we've got to make sure, first of all, that our native farmers are not disadvantaged as against those in mainland Europe. And by mainland Europe, I don't just mean the European Union, I mean countries outside the European Union as well. Otherwise, all we shall get is a flood of still worse produced imported foodstuffs. But we've got the opportunity, now that we've left the European Union, if we choose to seize it, to ban the import of goods produced under circumstances that we would simply not permit in the United Kingdom, whether that be from the European Union or from America or South America, the United States or South America. Quite clearly there's a reluctance to go down that road. We tried with the agriculture bill and we tried with the trade bill to get the right clauses on the face of the bill, and we failed, but that doesn't stop us going on trying. The Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation, of which I have the honor to be president at the moment, has, I think, blazed a trail in terms of the battle to get farrowing crates outlawed. But again, we are realistic about this, as we are with cages for laying hens, as we are with a number of other issues. We want to win the battle politically so that we can get the right legislation on the book. And that means recognizing that there are those that earn their living from production of food animals. And we have to make sure, therefore, that they are not, as I've said, financially disadvantaged, because if we don't go down that road, we shall simply move the problem from A to B. And while we might feel very happy thinking and morally very smug, saying, well, we've banned it here. But if all we do is shift the problem from here to Poland or Denmark or Romania, have food imported, meat imported from those countries, then we're not solving the problem. So it's got to be sustainable. Just by the by, so far nobody's mentioned fish. And that is something that I have a particular concern about. It's probably not wildly understood that there is an enormous amount of fish farming, both on land and in sea cages, that takes place in the United Kingdom. The mortality rate for sea cage salmon is somewhere between 12 and 18%. Now think about that. We complain rightly about the conditions under which caged hens are kept. That mortality rate is 2 to 3%. So 12 to 18% is horrific. If you look at the cost of abolishing cages for laying hens, it works out, we've established, at £3.74 per family per year. Not per week or per month, per year. We think that's affordable. We think it can be done. So I believe there is a very strong case for making the move now to shift radically away from factory production and towards much more civilized, animal welfare friendly forms of production. I appreciate that's not what everybody wants, but I believe that that would be a very significant step in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sir Roger. That was an excellent contribution. We'll come now to Dr. Lisa Cameron, who's joined us. So the same question, should the UK become one of the first countries to ban intensive factory farming? You've got just a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you to everybody who's here today speaking and listening. Such an important issue to be discussing. Yes, I think it would be wonderful if that was the direction of travel, so much so that I've actually tabled what's called an early day motion to Parliament to recommend that intensive factory farming is addressed legislatively. And I'll just read briefly out the motion text and then speak a bit more about some of the issues that have been discussed. So please, if you're listening, ask your MPs to sign up to Early Day Motion 1582 on intensive factory farming, which states this House notes that intensive farming methods inflict terrible suffering on some 1 billion land animals in the UK each year, recognises that intensive factory farming methods include the extreme confinement of pregnant sows in farrowing crates, the overcrowding and selective breeding of broiler chickens, ducks and turkeys, the routine mutilation of egg-laying hens and piglets, and the zero grazing of dairy cows. Further notes that factory farms often provide a fertile environment for the amplification and transmission of viruses and bacteria between different species and humans, and further recognises that today 3 in 4 of the world's new or emerging infectious diseases reportedly come from animals. Notes that the overuse of antibiotics in livestock farming is contributing to the rise and spread of antimicrobial resistance. Notes that a poll in January of this year revealed some 90% of UK residents want the government to introduce an immediate ban on intensive farming methods, and supports vegan charity Viva's request for DEFRA and government to listen to the UK public on this issue. And so far we have 17 cross-party supporters, so I would ask you to get in touch with your MPs, get some momentum going behind the early day motion, because I think in the run-up, particularly to COP26, we recognise the circularity and the intrinsic links between people, planet and animals, and that it's extremely important the UK shows leadership and strength in taking forward not just the public's will, as we've already heard today, but also shows that leadership in terms of animal welfare. And I know, and Sir Roger will be able to tell you as well, because he's a great champion of animal welfare, as you've heard, but cross-party, our MP's postbag, one of the most prevalent issues that we hear about is animal welfare. So please never ever think that this isn't a priority for the public and for constituents. They are continually telling MPs that this is a priority, that this is what we want to see happen. We want to make sure that standards are the highest they possibly can be, and for the UK to show leadership in that regard. So there are many MPs who are already recognising not just their constituents' calls, but also the importance in terms of health, the importance in terms of the environment, the importance in terms of climate change, and the importance in terms of caring and empathy to other creatures that we live alongside in this world today, and making sure that we show that determination to progress legislation in a positive direction to address these issues. So I would say, if you're listening today, get in touch with your MP, make sure that they raise these issues in Parliament. They can raise a debate on the issue. They could raise some questions to government in the chamber. We're doing that virtually just now, but they can still raise them nevertheless. And if that fails, they could raise a written question or a letter to government as well to raise it, because this is not an issue that people don't care about. Animal welfare is one of the top priorities for constituents contacting parliamentarians across the UK, and that's because we're a nation of animal lovers. And the work that you're doing here today, and the work that's led by Viva and with cross-party peers right across Parliament, is work that we can champion together and take forward, and hopefully achieve some of the aims, perhaps some short term, perhaps some more over the longer term, but achieve them together, that we really hope to see in terms of progress in animal welfare standards, and certainly in relation to intensive factory farming, which we know is cruel beyond belief from what we've heard today, but also we know that it's not good for health either, and it's not good for the environment. So we need to provide support, as Roger said, for those involved in factory farming, so that diversification can take place over the shorter term, but also we need to make sure that we work together over the longer term to progress the issues in the direction that we ultimately want to achieve an overall ban. So thank you for having me here today, and I am really keen to link with you again for other events and to continue to support this work in Parliament.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. That was some fantastic advice on what our viewers can do to get involved, and some great topics to discuss later on. We'll move now on to Kerri Waters. So just a couple of minutes on the same topic. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. So yes, I believe that we need to end factory farming. In fact, if we want a planet to live on for us and the animals, I think it's imperative that we do so. So I feel like we need to really make clear what we're talking about here. Factory farming exists in the UK, and it's the norm rather than the exception. So around about 73% of farmed animals are kept in intensive methods, although that's much higher depending on the species. This idyllic image of old MacDonald and his farm that we had as kids, that really isn't the truth. Unfortunately, giant agribusiness like JBS's Moy Park are dominating the market. In fact, just yesterday in Lincolnshire, planning permission for a giant mega chicken farm of 250,000 birds was approved. So just why is this happening? And it's not just because of profit and maximising efficiency. It's the fact our government has encouraged intensive farming through a subsidy system linked to the amount of land owned. Figures are really difficult to find because there isn't really a fixed definition of factory farming, and because the subsidy system is so complex. But we know that between 2016 and 17, intensive farmers received £70 million in taxpayers' money. If we want to bring about a comprehensive overhaul of this system that relies on intensive methods as the status quo, we do need cross-party political action. Hopefully that will start with the new environmental land management scheme that's going to replace the old subsidy system after Brexit. Rewarding farmers with public money or public goods and incentivizing environmental and animal welfare improvements is a step in the right direction, including banning practices like debeaking, beak trimming, and farrowing crates. However, many of these practices are a result of intensive farming methods, and any sensible government policy should focus on removing the cause of the problem itself, factory farming, rather than just addressing the symptoms. If our politicians really are truly committed to animal, planetary, and human health, then they need to put in policies that reflect this and redirect subsidies to protein crops and to helping farmers transition to alternatives. So yes, I think that it's vital, especially at this time during the climate emergency, and because there's increased public knowledge about animal welfare issues. I think banning factory farming is necessary and needed at this time.
Brilliant, thank you, Kerri. So and then we'll move on to Rebecca. If your 2 minutes, please.
Hi, thank you. Yes, of course, factory farms should be outlawed. I'm based in Scotland, and a lot of people think there's no factory farming in Scotland. As of 2017, however, there were 93 intensive pig and poultry farms in Scotland. One of the largest, owned by the family of an MSP, boasts a production of 3 million eggs a week and is reportedly a top 10 ammonia polluter. Salmon farming, as Sir Roger mentioned, is 100% factory farmed in Scotland, with 226 sites where substandard husbandry and obvious suffering is literally hidden below the surface. Viva reports up to 50,000 distressed salmon in a single cage, and my stats are a little higher than Sir Roger's. I have 20% of salmon die in these farms, eaten alive by sea lice, riddled with disease, or killed by the strong chemicals or brutal processes designed to treat them. Thousands of tons of debris and chemicals create lethal methane-producing dead zones on the ocean bed. In a year, the industry produces organic waste equivalent to the entire population of Scotland. Salmon are fed on pellets that contain fish meal and fish oil. It takes 5 pounds of smaller wild fish to produce 1 pound of farmed salmon, depleting our already overfished ocean ecosystems. Equally with our land-based factory farms, nature has and is being destroyed. Even with 55% of UK arable land used to grow animal feed, it's still not enough. 64% of our cropland footprint for animal feed occurs outside the UK. 2/3 of global agricultural deforestation is for animal feed. The UK imports almost 3 million tons of soya and soya meal every year. 93% of this goes to livestock feed, with 60% going to the poultry industry. Meat products on our supermarket shelves and in our fast food are still labelled sustainable, despite links to devastating clearance in Brazil's Cerrado. The shift to a plant-based diet would reduce food's land use by 76% and food's greenhouse gas emissions by up to 73%. What are we waiting for? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Iain, your 2 minutes.
Yeah, we've heard some really interesting stuff about the way animals are kept and the poor welfare. I want to really spend a little bit of time really thinking about the environmental welfare, which is a part of this whole system of animal culture. And we're seeing some horrendous environmental problems as a result of intensive livestock production. So it's land cruelty and environmental cruelty, I think, is probably, to me, the area which I think I need to perhaps dwell on a little bit. Factory farming has a huge carbon footprint. It contains a massive infrastructure of buildings, equipment, inputs. It has a huge carbon footprint, far greater than farming, which is done perhaps on a more extensive scale. It's also producing what I think most people would agree is a low-grade food. It's cheap, it's low-grade, it doesn't have the nutritional value that food produced in a far better way would have. So we're using a huge amount of carbon to produce a food which is really denatured, and really of very low quality indeed. And then there's the issue of manure, and I've seen this myself on very intensive farms. Very often, because these farms are buying in feed from literally all over the world, they're importing huge amounts of nutrient. Because they don't want to take manure very far away from the farm, because it's expensive to move manure around the place, it tends to get dumped on a relatively small area. This leads to very, very high levels of phosphate potash. But also there's a degree of high levels of copper, because copper comes from some of the material that's been added to feed to try and cut down on disease, but also antibiotics. And this is building up on areas of land and causing quite horrendous problems with soil life, soil quality, and soil biodiversity. And then there's the issue of land, which is perhaps being taken from rainforest in order to produce the food. And we're looking at a picture here which is heavily dependent on huge imports, as well as almost half of our own farmland being used for animals. We're also bringing food in from literally all over the world. Again, a massive environmental and carbon footprint. And I was really pleased to hear that Sir Roger mentioned the issue around fish farming, because this is something which I've been really I've been known to get quite angry about it on occasions, because it has the most horrendous animal welfare issues involved. I mean, far away as bad as any intensive poultry or pig, and people tend not to honour this in the way they should, because it's in a sea marine environment. People tend to think it doesn't actually matter that much, but we've heard already from Rebecca, it does matter a lot. Yeah. Again, there's a huge environmental cost in doing this. And absolutely, we have to ban factory farming, if not for the animal's sake. And I think, you know, the animal's sake perhaps has to come first, but also for the sake of environment, but also for the sake of freeing up land, because by freeing up land, it gives us the opportunity to grow more of our own food. It gives us the opportunity to look at rewilding. It gives us the opportunity to look at creating a completely different environment within the UK.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Iain. So we will move on to our first question. The issue of animal welfare is gaining more and more traction and attention. Lots of documentaries have been incredibly popular on the issue. And there is some evidence polling evidence of increasing interest in animal welfare and in vegetarian and vegan diets. So I'll come to Sir Roger on this one first. How important is it for this government to actually take action on the kind of growing public demand and introduce a ban?
I think it's important for government, not just this government. And as Lisa said, if we're going to win, we're going to have a cross-party approach. Lisa also said that animal welfare was one of the largest contributors to an MP's postbox, and she's absolutely right, it is. We shouldn't, and I personally never have, underestimated the interest in and the importance of animal welfare to the people who elect us. I have not why particularly, but I've been campaigning on this for 37 years in the House of Commons across a very wide range of issues, not just factory farming. Come directly to the point. This discussion this afternoon is about factory farming. One of the questions in the chat I noticed was, is this about factory farming or is it about organic farming? It's about factory farming. There are those that would, and I understand this entirely, that would like to move away from stock farming completely. But the reality is, if we are going to make real progress, we have to make it on an economically sustainable basis in terms of farming and also in terms of the public that shop. One of the other questions in the chat box was, and it was directed at me, why should we go on eating as much meat as we do? Well, the answer to that is we shouldn't. And in terms of practicing what I preach, I don't. I normally, courtesy of a wife who cooks excellent vegetables, have probably 2 roast vegetable main meals a week and 1 stir-fry vegetable meal per week, which means that I've cut down quite a lot, because there was a time when I used to eat meat every day. And I'm probably better for it. There are other peripheral issues that we're going to have to address and win, and these are not your issues, but they're most certainly mine. I am losing in my constituency vast tracts of grade 1 agricultural land to housing development. In days gone by, that would never have been permitted, and I'm in the middle of a royal row with both the Prime Minister and Robert Jenrick over this practice, because if we are going to move away from animal farming, and particularly if we're going to move away from factory farming, then initially the animals that some of you don't want farmed at all are going to have somewhere to live, and that somewhere is out of doors. So that land is going to be needed. And if we move to where you want to be, some of you, which is to a vegan vegetarian society, then we're going to need those fields, that agricultural land, to grow crops if we're going to be self-sufficient. Otherwise, as I said, we're going to end up importing a very great deal. So I want to get this cart very firmly behind the horse. I want to make absolutely certain that every step that we take is economically sustainable, justifiable, viable, so that any government hasn't got an argument that says we can't afford that or our farmers can't afford that. If we go down that road, and if we educate the public to, yes, reduce the amount of animal products that we use, then I think we can make this genuinely sustainable. Final point on this, people say, oh, well, people will say they want animal welfare, but they vote with their purses when it comes to the supermarket checkout. So they will buy cheap battery eggs rather than free range eggs, for instance. Well, what we do know is that in terms of the one thing I haven't mentioned, but I'll maybe come on to later, we'll come back to labeling, I'm sure. But just in terms of mandatory egg labeling, when eggs had to be labeled as to their source, the volume of free range eggs, which are more expensive, doubled in sales. I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I think if we can go down that road, we can take the public and farmers, and which is important, the House of Commons and the House of Lords with us.
Brilliant, thank you, Sir Roger. So we'll come to Lindsay on this as well. How important is it politically for politicians, for the government to listen to public support for a ban? Sorry, Lindsay, Lisa, sorry. You're okay, yep.
Oh, sorry, Dana. I wasn't sure if you were meaning me or not. I've gone by many names. Some always not ones I've chosen since I've entered politics anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, as Roger said, and it has to be cross-party, and it's because it has to be sustainable across time as well. So it's about getting politicians involved, and one of the ways of doing that is making them aware as to what a priority it is for their constituents, as we've mentioned. The other issue I think that Roger's touched on that's really important is labelling, and many of the labels are very complex just now, and we did, when I was on the Health Select Committee, we did a report into antimicrobial resistance, and we looked at some of the different labelling, red tractor and various different types of labels, and people are very confused as to what that all means, and I think there has to be a clarity in that, and people are interested to know the journey of whatever they consume nowadays, whether it's fast fashion or whether it's the food that they eat. They want to know the journey and who's been involved, and that people have been treated properly, and also animals have been treated in high welfare standard ways. So I think as technology progresses, I know that from some discussions about some other work I've been doing on climate change, looking at fast fashion, we're going to be able to put our mobile phones onto labels and be able to track where, for instance, the garments come from, who's been involved in the production, how it was produced, all of those types of issues. And I think when that happens more widely, and when it includes the food that we eat, I think that's when the consumer will really be demanding that because it will be so visible and so available to them, the information that they need at the point of purchase. And I think government moves when people move, and when consumers shift, that's going to be a really crucial part of that too. And I do hope we go on to speak a bit more about how technology can help with those advances, and particularly, as Sir Roger and some others have mentioned, labelling, I think, and information to consumers so that they can make appropriate choices in alignment with their own values is going to be really key. I do also, if I have a couple of seconds left, I watch a programme on television, and I notice each week when I watch it, and it's about a family who don't have a lot of income and another family who do have lots of spare income. And I note every week that the family who don't have a lot of income have much less choice in terms of what they buy and what they consume and what they can eat and the health of their family. And so I think we also have to move forward and make sure that a healthy choice and also a sustainable choice and a cruelty-free choice is one that people can actually make in relation to their budgets too. So there's a lot of work for government to do in terms of enabling consumers as we move ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. That's yeah, really crucial point, I think, about making healthy eating and sustainable choices accessible to everyone across the kind of socioeconomic spectrum. So we'll move on to the second question now. So as we were discussing earlier, there are substantiated links between factory farming and zoonotic diseases, but I don't think that's particularly controversial. And there's increasing concerns about how agricultural intensification will lead to potentially an increase in the number of zoonotic diseases that emerge in the coming years and decades. So for this question, we would discuss how important it is that there be a ban on factory farming, specifically in relation to human health and those risks. So I'll come to Juliette first. How important is it, do you think, in terms of human health, that we ban intensive factory farming?
Very important. But to understand how a ban on factory farming can help, I think you need to understand the risk. So, as you said, 3 in 4 of the world's new or emerging infectious diseases come from animals, hence the name of Viva's campaign, 3 in 4. But if you set out to create global pandemics, basically you would build factory farms. They're the perfect setting for viruses and for bacteria to mutate and to spread. The animals, as we've said, are raised in closed, they're filthy environments, stressful, crowded industrial facilities with little or no natural light, and natural light, of course, kills viruses. Their immunity is low, as they're being bred for fast growth, and worse still, they're being bred for genetic uniformity. So factory farms play a critical role, not only in the spread of diseases from animals to humans, but also in the amplification of disease, and scientists are repeatedly warning us about this. In other words, factory farms act as a petri dish, providing an ideal environment for bacteria and viruses to mutate and to develop into something more sinister, simply because those microbes have an unnaturally high number of hosts that they can infect, all crammed together, all stressed, all genetically weak. And this amplification of disease has already happened and continues to do so all over the world. So I just want to look at one thing, which is bird flu, to illustrate why this ban in factory farming has to happen for our sakes. So there have been several human flu pandemics that all originated in animals. So in 1918, we've all heard of Spanish flu, where 50 million or so people died from H1N1 bird flu virus. Nearly half of those, by the way, who died were aged between 20 and 40 years old. Today, H5N1 is one of the several bird flu viruses which is causing scientists deep concern. So it first jumped to people in 1997. It only infected about 18 of them, but it killed a third of them, including a 3-year-old. Its natural hosts are wild birds, but they don't get ill. It passed to factory farmed poultry and then became highly pathogenic. So this amplification of disease happened. It's now moved across the world, and there have been 15,000 separate outbreaks in which 240 million poultry have been killed trying to contain it, which has failed. Over 800 people now have been infected with an over 50% death rate. So that's 1 in 2 people are dying. So that's not just one outbreak where it's spread between those people. Those are separate instances where it's jumping from chickens to people over and over and over again. So the fear from scientists is that it will mutate to become more efficient at spreading between humans. And the chances of that mutation happening, of course, increase gigantically when the hosts, as I said, are crammed tens of thousands to a shed. So basically, factory farming of chickens has created this enormous ecological niche for bird flu viruses to become more sinister, more deadly. And bird flu viruses amongst the most dangerous that can affect people with the highest, some of the highest fatality rates. Finally, I just want to mention that pigs are also susceptible to these flu viruses. They're susceptible to the flu viruses from birds, from people, and from other pigs. So these viruses within pigs in factory farms, there's the danger that they spread within those pigs from these different species and produce novel viruses. And this mixing of viral genes is called reassortment. And it's common in flu viruses. New strains, as we all know, keep emerging, hence having to have different vaccines every year. And it's what happened to cause the outbreak of swine flu in 2009, where hundreds of thousands of people died. Many of those people, again, were young. It's a question of time, scientists say, not if, it's a when, before a bird flu virus such as H5N1 becomes capable of efficient human-to-human transmission directly due to the way we are factory farming animals, with a potential for a global pandemic far worse than COVID-19. Should it emerge, lots of people have said to me, oh, well, but we'll stockpile vaccines. Surely now COVID-19's happened, governments will stockpile vaccines, but it's going to be so difficult to stockpile vaccines and antivirals because they're likely to have a limited impact on preventing the associated disease and deaths because viruses mutate and are genetically diverse. So the choice of candidate viruses for the development of these vaccines is going to be incredibly difficult and would have to be continually updated. So basically what I'm saying is the world is unprepared for an outbreak of the scale and deadliness that avian influenza would cause. So finally, the best option is what? To reduce the risk of future pandemics, it's to invest in veganism. We have to take this seriously. This is not a peripheral issue. We have to, as our government, whatever political colour you're from, we have to invest in our future. That means investing in plant-based systems. We have to help farmers transition to plant-based food systems. We have to invest in plant proteins and in alternative high-tech proteins to take the meat-eating public from eating animal flesh to eating those alternatives, whether it's cultured meat, which it probably will be. We have to take this seriously and invest in it. We have to educate the public as to why this is necessary. Viva has been doing this for years, as have many other organisations. We have not had any government backing. We need the government to sit up and take this seriously. We need to end factory farming before it ends us. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. Very powerful words. Kerri Waters, do you want to chime in on the importance to our own health of ending factory farming?
Yes, and thanks, Juliet. I think that was a really impassioned speech and gave a really interesting example. But one area that I feel has been overlooked during these discussions about pandemics and animal agriculture is antibiotic resistance. Just don't take it just from me. In the words of a 2019 World Health Organization report, there is no time to wait. Unless the world acts urgently, antimicrobial resistance will have disastrous impact within a generation. Now, we already know that this kills around about 700,000 people globally per year. And the UK's own O'Neill report concluded that the unnecessary use of antibiotics in animals is a significant concern for human health. But why do factory farms increase the chances of this happening? Well, drug-resistant bacteria are created in farm animals by antibiotic use, and these resistant bacteria are then transmitted in food, in slurry, in pollution, and they're also spread person to person. These diseases, they have devastating consequences on human health, and we're talking about things like Salmonella, E. coli. The overuse of antibiotics in intensive pig farming, for example, has caused the emergence of a new strong pig strain of MRSA. These crowded, stressful conditions in factory farms means that those animals are much more likely to be sick and require antibiotics. The intensive nature of pig production, for example, means that piglets are often taken away from their mothers too early before they've had a chance to develop a strong immune system, and they require antibiotics. 50% of antibiotics worldwide are used in farming, although that figure is much less in the UK. It's around about 33%, and it is declining. We're still seeing undercover investigations find illegal uses of antibiotics to promote growth and prevent illness in the UK. Every time we give these antibiotics to animals in the food system, we are gambling with human health. And COVID-19 has been devastating for many of us. However, the thought of what antibiotic resistance has the potential to unleash is a nightmare. And I'll just finish quickly with the story of an ex-factory farmer in the US called Russ Kramer. He was injecting pigs with antibiotics 3 times per day. He contracted a superbug from a pig bite, and 7 different antibiotics failed to work, and it led to years of misery for him. And that's just one man on one case. We need to end factory farming now before we unleash something that we just can't control.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's terrifying example. Rebecca, did you want to answer that question as well? The importance of towards our own health, not just animal welfare, of banning factory farming.
Yes, thank you. It's crucial, of course, to protect humanity and also to stop ignoring these warnings. Between 2004 and 2016, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the World Organization for Animal Health, the World Health Organization, and the United Nations Environment Programme all stated that our increasing demand for animal protein is one of the main risk factors for the emergence and spread of zoonotic diseases. Ignored. In 2006, the Journal of Current Opinion in Infectious Diseases reported that, quote, close contact between humans and food animals leads to severe respiratory infections with pandemic potential such as avian influenza and SARS. Ignored. Clearly, animal products pose a health risk. Fortunately, they're a non-essential item in the human diet, so as Viva says, let's slash the risk with dietary change. According to DEFRA and a more recent study by Harvard University, we have enough existing arable land in the UK to grow food that meets the calorific, protein and nutrient needs of our entire population. Doing this would greatly boost our nation's food security. Shifting to plant-based diets would also combat many of the endemic as well as pandemic health problems our society face, such as diabetes, heart disease, obesity, that put people at higher risk for mortality from diseases such as COVID-19. Farmers too are looking for change. Those with permanent grazing land unsuitable for growing crops for human consumption could be funded to farm carbon capture by rewilding their land and assisting our climax vegetation of native forests to restore. UK-wide, if we did this, it would offset the equivalent of 9 years of current CO2 emissions and, crucially, restore the nature and biodiversity which forms a natural barrier against zoonotic disease. Using all our existing arable land to grow crops for human consumption and returning all permanent pasture back to nature would provide a win for public health, a win for food security, a win for animals, a win for farmers and for the planet. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Rebecca. So we'll move on to our third question now. So we've discussed at length the need and the need to ban intensive factory farming, but Perhaps we should move on to the ways. So if we do end intensive factory farming, there'll be a lot of farmers, meat and dairy farmers who, and poultry and pork farmers who will have to find some other way of working. So how exactly can we do that? How can we help farmers move towards potentially stock-free farming or other businesses that don't involve intensive factory farming? First, I'd like to come to Iain Tolhurst. You've got lots of experience of stock-free farming. So how do you think the best way to do this transition would be?
Right, yes, I've been farming about livestock for more than 30 years. We don't use any animal inputs or any fertilizer of any type whatsoever. There's a misconception that organic farming relies heavily on manure. This is not true. In fact, there are a number of farms who do not use any animal products at all, and this has been proven to be quite agronomically efficient, and also it's very good in terms of food production. First, we need to identify those farmers who would like to, if they could, give up livestock. And I do know there are quite a few, particularly ones where they are locked into a very intensive system, factory farming. They would very much like an opportunity to move to another type of agriculture. So we need to identify those farmers. It can be very easily done. DEFRA conducts an almost annual survey of farmers every year. Agricultural census. It would be very easy to ask farmers their feelings on this. This is a subject which has never been brought up in the agricultural census, so it could be done quite easily, quite cheaply. So once we've discovered perhaps where these farmers are and how many are, then we need to set up a system to help those farmers. And we would need a really good advisory service. We do not have an agricultural advisory service anywhere in the UK at all. Thatcher managed to get rid of the last of it in the 70s and 80s. We need a system of support. We need farmers to be able to engage in advice from agronomists, from agriculturalists, in terms of making a transition away from intensive agricultural, particularly livestock, towards a plant-based system. We have the knowledge, we have the expertise, we know this can be done, but we do need a system of technically well-informed advisors and consultants to deliver this advice to farmers. And DEFRA really should be in charge of this. I mean, DEFRA has supported in the past, it has supported conversions for organic farmers, it supported it in terms of support in grant systems, but also in terms of advisory support. So we know this can be done. This is not difficult to do. They also need to ensure that farmers are farming in the best possible way. Now, ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is about to be launched in the UK, we don't really have the details yet, but there are some potentially really good opportunities coming about through the use of ELMS, in that farmers could be converting from their intensive livestock production systems to a much more plant-based farming agricultural system. And ELMS has got the opportunity to do that. We're no longer going to be paying farmers to get away with whatever they want to get away with, simply because they have acres of land. Farmers are going to have to start delivering public goods. The public are paying for this, and the public have the right to demand how farms operate and how farms manage their systems. And I think a move away from intensive livestock, and in some cases completely removing livestock altogether from farms, would fit in very well with the Environmental Land Management Scheme. So really the onus is going to be on the farmer, but undoubtedly we need support from government. DEFRA has to take a leading role in this. They really do. Farmers will only do what they're asked to do, and farmers have always done very well what they've been asked to do by government. And I think farmers will rise very much to the occasion, providing they're given the necessary financial and moral support and technical advice in doing this.
Brilliant, thank you. And that was a really interesting answer. Rebecca, do you have some views on the best way to kind of ensure a smooth transition for farmers away from intensive factory farming?
Yes, I do. Thank you. And I'd just like to touch on a couple of things that Iain said. Farmers Stock Free Farming, our organisation, has just launched a survey. Iain mentioned surveying farmers to see what their agreement or willingness would be to shift to stock-free farming. So we've just released a survey on our website, farmersstockfreefarming.org, to get farmers' opinions on shifting to stock-free farming. The other thing Iain mentioned was an advisory service, that we need an advisory service who's capable of advising about shifting to stock-free farming. We were recently contacted by a farmer who has some pasture land, and he said he couldn't afford cattle and sheep this year because of the prices skyrocketing. And the Farm Advisory Service came in to advise him, and we're not able to give him any other solutions. So that's a serious deficit there that needs to be addressed. You know, personally, I think the government is on the right track with the Environmental Land Management Scheme. The 6 public goods that will be rewarded with public payments are things that veganic stock-free farmers are already doing. So we've got reduction and adaptation to climate change, thriving plants and wildlife, clean and plentiful water, protection from environmental hazards, beauty, heritage and engagement with the environment, and clean air, all things that veganic producers are already doing. What we need right now, though, is a transition fund to help farmers who are ready to shift to stock-free farming, to help them set up a new enterprise, to bridge the gap until their first veganic crops are harvested and sold, and to compensate them upfront for rewilding and restoring ecosystems on their land. You know, over the next 7 years, the basic payments scheme will go, and the money saved could be used to do this, but we need that money now on the front end. Another option is taxing farmers who insist on still farming livestock and using the tax monies to incentivize farmers who are willing to shift to stock-free initiatives. That would be another option. You know, I agree with Iain that, you know, farmers are natural entrepreneurs. They can and will support themselves, but the transition part needs to be funded. There's a former battery hen farmer near where I live, and he has converted his massive building into a spotlessly clean storage facility for caravans and motorhomes. And in the back, he started a second business shipping out used books. We have 3 crofters on the Isle of Skye. They have started a kelp crofting business, resurrecting the Western Isles seaweed industry and creating a replicable alternative to fish farming. And then a crofter in Sutherland, who was denied all subsidies, has planted a thriving orchard of over 800 hazelnut trees. You know, if you want money for a new cowshed in the Highlands, that's no problem. But if you want money to grow nutritious food to feed our people, no way. And that has to change, and that has to change now. And finally, we need a government-driven, fact-based information campaign to inform the public about the catastrophic health, welfare and environmental impacts of livestock agriculture. This would create a soaring demand for veganic food that producers will then have to beat. We need the government to tell the truth, otherwise there will be no future. Thank you.
And thank you, Rebecca. Really interesting. So I guess I'll come to Lisa Cameron now. So, you know, particularly on the role of the importance of subsidy and regulation on helping, if we want to ban factory farming, how do we help farmers transition away from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, isn't it? And MPs will have farmers in their constituencies who will be in touch regarding these issues and some of the challenges that are faced if they do want to diversify, etc. So there has to be a funding structure that can make it possible. But I think also, you know, in relation to a more wider point, and I'm noticing down the chat, I totally agree with those who are listening who are saying that there needs to be an education component as well. And I think in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, I think if we were to have that form part of the curriculum for young people and animal welfare, you know, to sit within that alongside it in relation to some of the issues that were addressed, then you're looking at, you know, supporting farmers, supporting diversification, but you're also looking at supporting cultural change as well and a shift. And that has to also come from education. And I think, well, I would like to see the Sustainable Development Goals being taught in our schools. And I would like to see that in, you know, in the run up to COP26, that being, you know, looked at, but also I'd like to see it for the future, for future generations, so that the people are informed, but they're also much more at one with the climate, at one with the environment, and considering important matters of animal welfare and food production, and that cultural change then can shift as well, but it will take some time.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a little bit of time now, I think, for some Q&A. I know some of the panelists have already been in there and answered some of the questions, had a look, but sort of gone through and picked out a handful. I guess one of the ones, it's come up a few times, I think I've seen in there, but Hannah Dickinson's is the one that I've spotted. So I think I might come to Juliet for this one first, but perhaps other panelists as well. Once we transition away from intensive factory farming, does that mean we will have to change our diets too as well, or is it viable for us to maintain our kind of current consumption habits while abandoning intensive farming? Juliet, you're on mute. Just thanks.
Thanks. No, we can't maintain the amount of animal products that we're eating as a nation and globally, because it's feeding into the climate crisis, the wildlife crisis. You know, the United Nations have said we're in the 6th mass extinction, got 200 species going extinct every single day. You know, we have to sit up and realise that we all have an individual responsibility, but that also makes it, you know, a positive thing, because it means we can do something ourselves. Every time we step inside a shop, we have the power within our wallet to make a difference. And I have to say, the actual transformation that's happening within the UK, this sort of vegan revolution, if you like, in terms of vegan foods being taken seriously and the amount of products that are available now, just compared to even 2 years ago, it's because of consumer campaigning. And industry is taking notice of those consumers. So, for example, I looked at a report which was done by a major organisation which basically funds industry. And, you know, they're not a vegan organisation by any stretch of their imagination, but they're looking at the predictions for the future. And it's almost like that, you know, everything's being driven, you know, from the consumer through. But what we need now is, you know, the consumers. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, we lost you for a second. I think you're back now.
Okay. So what we need is obviously for consumers to change themselves and understand the reasons why they need to reduce meat, fish and dairy consumption, because the oceans are ecologically collapsing, because factory farming and free range farming is completely unsustainable, and because, of course, slaughtering animals is cruel and the risk of future pandemics, antibiotic resistance, all of these things. To help us make people understand that, when they realize it's for their own benefits, revolutions really happen. And I mean a food revolution. So governmental role could be, as some people have mentioned, in terms of educating children, educating people through schools, educating the public by continually pumping out the message that we do need to change ourselves and take responsibility for ourselves. So in answer to your question, coming back to the point, no, we cannot sustain consuming animals in the way that we are at the moment. We must get on that road of compassion, as I like to call it, and move towards a vegan diet. Any maneuver in that direction is a good one, is a positive one. We need government help to do it for all the reasons that we've already discussed today. And industry are jumping on board because they see the massive profits in it. I have to say, having talked to industry quite a lot recently, one of them was actually saying, this is not just about us making money, Juliet. Well, it is ultimately, but they can see that the climate crisis is going to destroy their own industry. So they're getting interested in veganism because they are understanding that it is literally needed to save our futures. And government have to take it as seriously as industry is starting to. One thing I do want to mention before I forget is also the usefulness of the law. There's a voluntary group called Humane Being who are making a legal challenge to the UK government, and which will hopefully lead to judicial review, using the services of Viva patron, actually one of the best, in my opinion, barrister, and many other people's opinions, one of the best barristers in the UK, Michael Mansfield QC, is leading that challenge. So if anybody's interested in that, if you just Google Humane Beings legal challenge to the UK government, that's something else, another way of tackling things. Ultimately, it's about us all actually taking responsibility for ourselves and, you know, taking responsibilities for what we buy.
And I know you've talked about it already a bit, Iain, but do you want to just sort of say about where, you know, is it realistic for these less intensive methods to step up and fill the gap and supply enough food for us?
Yes, was that directed at me?
Yeah, it was, Iain.
Yeah, sorry, I was dozing off. No, I wasn't. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've shown on our farm, and we've had a lot of surveys done on our farm, which has highlighted our performance, it's very much possible to increase food production without having livestock and without having a detrimental effect on the environment. We're actually able to show that our farm can actually build carbon, despite the fact we produce a very large amount of fruit vegetables every year for our local customers. We can do that without damaging the environment. We can do it without use of livestock inputs. It hasn't been done on a huge scale. We're quite small, we're only 20 acres, but it's easily transferable to a much larger unit. And we also deliver pretty much all the public goods that would be expected of us through ELMS. In fact, we do deliver all the public goods that would be expected of us through the ELMS system. So we're confident that we can scale this up, and that other farmers could also be doing a very similar type of process on their farms. It can suit both arable crops and also vegetables, fruit. So there's no reason at all to think that we could not feed the population in the UK, because I think this is often an argument which is levelled at any big agricultural change, and that we're never going to feed the growing population. Well, we're not managing it by even 50% at the moment. And the point Juliette made is that, you know, we are going to have to change. There's going to be a serious modification of people's diets. I don't for 1 minute think everyone's going to become vegan or vegetarian tomorrow, as much as I'd like it. It's going to be a long and slow process, but we have to start that process. We cannot carry on business as usual with the planet. There's too much at stake. And I think we're getting near to crunch time, and we're really going to have to make a big change. And the impact that agriculture has on climate change is one of the largest of any industry, and we really have to get this sorted in a very short space of time. And I think moving away from intensive livestock is really the first part of that process. UK has a great history of banning things that we don't like in the past. We've done it with slavery, we've allowed women to have votes. We've done all these things first. I think we need to be setting the scene here for the rest of the planet to follow suit.
Brilliant, thanks, Iain. So we've had quite a bit of discussion from quite a few of the panelists about the importance of education and prompting people to use their economic votes, if you like, for sort of higher animal welfare. We've got a question in the Q&A from Jorge Rodriguez, who asks, do we need a bit of stick as well as carrot? Is it the time for a meat tax or something similar to kind of shift people's habits? So I might come to you, Kerri, on this one first. Do you think there's a place for meat taxes to prompt people?
Yes, I think that we do not pay the true cost of what it takes to produce animals in the way that we do. A meat tax would allow us to be able to see exactly the impact, the environmental and climate impacts of the meat that we're eating. However, I don't think that it's simply just a case of taxing meat will reduce consumption. When we think about how imported the government is supporting a trade tariffs and trade barrier, they won't put in any trade barriers with the new agriculture bill to stop us from importing cheap meats and dairy from other countries. When we look at things like that, then you have to wonder whether a meat tax would actually work in this country. But it is one part of a solution that would also involve stopping subsidies and stopping us from using taxpayers' money to prop up these industries. For example, if you remember last year, the ADHB were given £500,000 of taxpayers' money to promote milk during the coronavirus. During a time when people are struggling for jobs and struggling to live, we're propping up an industry that's unprofitable, that's cruel, and that's not necessary for human health. So yeah, I do think a meat tax is essential, but it's one part of a solution.
So Roger, I might come to you on this. Are there sort of fiscal levers that could be pulled to sort of level the playing field between non-factory farms and factory farms? So not just necessarily abroad, obviously we can put up trade barriers, but perhaps domestically to level the playing field between the two. I
think there are some fiscal measures that can be used, but I don't think a meat tax is one of them, unless you want a revolution, and I suspect you probably don't. Look, I appreciate that there are a lot of people on this call, both on the panel and listening to it, who want something done now. And something they want done is to end the consumption of all animal products. That is not the reality. It is not what the majority of the people of the United Kingdom want at the moment. That may change, but at the moment, that's not what they want. So we have to live in the real political world and deal with the art of the possible. Because we've left the European Union, it is possible to prevent the import of products produced under circumstances that we would not permit in the United Kingdom now under present UK law. Veal crates is an example. At the moment, well, prior to the 31st of December, you could import white veal from various places. And I was one of the people who actually secured the ban on the use of the veal crate. We moved the problem from A to B. Actually, we made it worse because veal calves were then shipped across the channel to be brought up in barns in Holland and Belgium and France. If you want to solve the problem, you've got to get to the root of the problem, and you have to do it realistically. If we put our farmers out of business, bearing in mind we've got trade deals coming over the horizon with the United States, with South America, with China, various other countries, all that will happen is we shall import product raised under circumstances and conditions that we would not permit in this country now, never mind in the future. If we can move to a situation where we get rid of factory farming for much more welfare-friendly farming, and I think we can, then that has got to be a significant step in the right direction, and you should not allow the best to become the enemy of the good, in your terms. So if we're going to use money, this is your question was, what's the fiscal a way of doing this? The answer is to, yes, support farmers to get out of factory farming and into welfare-friendly farming. Still with livestock, I'm sorry, but that would be a significant step. You've got to facilitate that financially, because there is a huge investment at the moment in battery cages, for example. If you want to get rid of them, and I do, then you have to support that. That is not, I appreciate, what you want now, but it is achievable.
Brilliant, thank you. So there's another question in the Q&A that come up a few times from various people. One is from Mariella Minicello, which is that we've talked about some of the practices or even malpractices that take place in factory farming, but a lot of it surely is in breach of existing legislation. So is there an issue of, is there a lack of enforcement in Britain? I'll come to Rebecca on this one first. Is lack of enforcement of the rules we already have part of the problem?
Well, I can probably only really speak about fish farming there, because that's what I've looked into. And I know Marine Scotland and the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency have been criticised multiple times for letting substandard farming go below the radar. You know, they've noticed terrible things happening in fish farms, and these farms have not been penalised. And that's been brought to the attention of the public by divers who go underwater, activists who actually film the conditions right after Marine Scotland have been there, and nothing has happened. So I know that's definitely true with fish farming. I think fish, because they're out of sight, it very easily slips past the radar. And I think Juliet would probably be better at addressing how unregulated it is on land farms.
Yeah, Juliet, so is there a problem that the existing legislation is not enforced properly?
I think the problem is that the legislation itself is so very weak. Every time we go inside a factory farm, we produce a report, we send that to the government's Animal and Plant Health Agency, we send it to trading standards, we send it to every authority that you possibly could send it to that could make any kind of difference. So one example was Flathouse Farm in Leicestershire last year, which is a so-called mega pig farm. Despite the fact that we, walked straight into a unit where animals were literally thrashing about in the, God knows how long they've been left, in the throes of death, animals with rectal strictures where literally their bellies were bloated out and their spines sticking through because they can't absorb any nutrients, but they can't poo, and should be put to sleep because they're not going to get veterinary treatment, but just left to suffer over weeks. Animals with ulcerations through to the bone. Despite the fact that this place I've seen a lot of places was of such low standards, nothing happened to that farm. It was not penalised. It was Red Tractor approved. Red Tractor went in the same month that we did our first investigation. And it's only because you publicise these places and you get, you know, quite a lot of media support, I would say, these days, and it goes wide through social media, that these places become embarrassed, and, you know, Red Tractor makes a statement saying, yes, you know, we'll suspend the farm, or that's what usually happens. But so what? Often Red Tractor puts them back into their scheme very quietly a short time later. So the law is just incredibly weak. If you look at the codes, so for example, with pigs again, a place like Hogwood, they will have a chain hanging with a piece of rubber on the end, and that allows them to get away with providing so-called environmental enrichment to these hugely intelligent animals. You know, a chain which loses its novelty value within about 5 minutes to an animal as bright as a pig. So you can say, and they do, oh, these places are inspected as much as you like. It's the fact that the standards in the UK and the rest of the world, it's just accepted that cruelty is endemic and it's part and parcel of the whole system. And that's why I said right at the start, in fact, we should ban factory farming just because of the cruelty to the animals themselves. We should be brave enough to say, hang on a minute, this is wrong in a civilized society. And be proud of saying that, and proud to say that we're compassionate enough to do this. And instead, you hear so many industrialists, so many retailers, so many politicians always trying to bring in the other issues, even when they care about animal welfare, because it's almost like they're afraid to actually just say animal cruelty is wrong. I'm not talking about people on the panel today. You know, why has it become so acceptable to be so cruel?
So we're running out of time slightly, but I wanted to come back to you, Juliet, just for one final point. Is a lot of the chat and a lot of the questions that have come up are all around the same point, which is this sort of education thing, that if only people knew and understood, and a lot of that, you know, they talk about labeling and things, but if you tomorrow were given control over what we teach kids and maybe even adults about the food we eat and farming, what would you do with that power? What would you want the message to be that we give to kids about the food that they eat and where it comes from? Juliet, sorry.
Is that me again?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I wanted to give you the
well, in fact, I started my career in this movement a very long time ago as youth education officer for another organisation, and I was actually doing 3 to 4 school talks, secondary schools, every single week. So I've got a lot of experience in terms of how children and teenagers respond to our messaging, and I've given a fair few primary school talks as well. And I can tell you absolutely assuredly, having spoken to literally thousands of young people, that all you need to do is tell them the truth. They see things definitely in more black and white terms than we do as adults, but actually they see things more clearly from many perspectives. You tell them about the impacts of factory farming, show them the conditions inside a factory farm, and they accept that it's completely wrong and they want it to go. And one of the biggest responses, of course, when you show teenagers what's going on inside a factory farm is, how the hell is that legal? How are they getting away with it? Why does the government allow this to happen? And of course, this sort of smog that's come down the UK, which, I mean, my MP, he actually quoted at me about a week ago, Britain has the highest welfare standards in the world, you know, and they keep repeating this line to justify the unjustifiable. If you tell children the environmental damage that we're doing, the fact that animal agriculture is the main driver of wildlife species loss, it's one of the main drivers of the climate crisis, it's one of the main drivers of loss of freshwater use worldwide. If you explain them to this, and the fact that we can transition to a much better system, if only there was the will to do so, they are actually gobsmacked and they want things to change. They want that leadership. And I have to say, you know, having spoken to, just before the lockdown happened, I was giving a talk to a very big crowd, there's about 800 people. And before I spoke, a young man went on who was about 16 years old. And the impassioned voice of saying, why have you handed us this gigantic mess to sort out? Why have you allowed factory farming to become endemic? you know, you as a society, British society, what are we responsible for in terms of what we're handing on to the next generation? It is absolutely appalling. We should be ashamed as a generation, my generation. And we really need to now, as I say, not just be talking about banning a cage, you know, or banning a crate. We have to be talking about wholesale dietary change. And the government's role in this could seriously be explaining to the public why this is required, because then we could get them to demand that change. And then things, as we've seen, as I said before, with the explosion in vegan provision, things really start to happen because industry takes it seriously. We do need intergovernmental cooperation on this. And, you know, for some reason, I still have optimism. I must do to be running Viva and doing what I do. I still have faith and I still have hope in the human spirit and our ingenuity to enable change to happen. We all know everything's in place to make this happen in terms of what we understand. We know it's possible. Come on, everybody, we've got to make this happen. Stop talking about it, take it seriously and implement these changes.
Brilliant, thanks, Julia. I think that's a good rallying call to wrap up on. I think it's been a really worthwhile discussion, really enjoyable panel. Thanks to all of our panelists for turning up and for giving up their afternoons to talk to us about this on a very important subject. You've heard from quite a few of the panelists what you can do, how you can get involved, and I think perhaps the key message that's come from all sides is that this needs to be cross-party, done on a cross-party basis with consensus, if it's to be made to work. So do get involved and contact your MP and try and make a difference if you can. And yeah, the next stage, if you want to see an end to factory farming, is to get it discussed in the Commons and get it voted on. But thank you very much all for coming, for watching, for contributing questions, answers, and especially to our panelists. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your afternoons.